Flight crew kicks black woman off plane for not belonging. She returns as their new owner. They never saw her coming. Evelyn Maxwell, a determined and brilliant entrepreneur, boarded Flight 2247 at John F. Kennedy International Airport, filled with optimism for her next big business pitch. But within minutes, a humiliating clash with the flight crew would lead to a gut-wrenching injustice, kicked off the plane simply because they decided she didn't belong. The shocking encounter left Evelyn devastated, igniting a fierce resolve to stand up for herself. Little did that crew know, the very woman they tried to silence would soon return, wielding a power none of them could have predicted. This is her story of heartbreak, redemption, and ultimate triumph. Evelyn Maxwell woke up that crisp spring morning with her heart pounding in anticipation. It wasn't fear, it was excitement. Only a month prior, she had received an invitation to pitch her new technology startup to a group of investors in Los Angeles. Though she was a New York native and loved the pulse of the city, the possibilities in LA beckoned her like a bright star on the horizon. She arrived at John F. Kennedy International Airport early, determined to avoid any last-minute travel hassles. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit and carrying her prized laptop in a sleek black bag, Evelyn was the picture of confidence and professionalism. As she navigated the lines at the security checkpoint, Evelyn noticed how the airport thrummed with energy, people weaving between aisles, announcements echoing over the PAR system, the squeak of luggage wheels on polished floors. She loved the hustle. It matched her spirit. For someone who'd grown up in a modest neighborhood in Queens, where hopes and dreams felt like luxuries few could afford, every milestone in Evelyn's life felt like an electric jolt of gratitude. She had fought too hard to get where she was, spending late nights buried in textbooks, hustling between part-time jobs, and never allowing self-doubt to overshadow her ambitions. On that day, Evelyn had one focus: deliver her pitch for a groundbreaking software solution. She'd named Solar Nexus, which streamlined data management for large-scale solar energy farms. Her project had already garnered attention from environmental enthusiasts, tech bloggers, and even a couple of venture capitalists who saw its potential to reshape the renewable energy market. She'd be meeting those potential backers at a private investor's house in Beverly Hills. The flight to LA was crucial. If she could win them over, Evelyn believed she'd secure the funds needed to propel her startup to the next level. All seemed routine as she approached the gate. A kind elderly flight attendant in the waiting area engaged her in small talk about the flight time. Evelyn answered politely, smiling at the idea that soon she would be on her way to what might be the biggest opportunity of her life. She didn't notice that, off to the side, another flight attendant, a tall, stern-faced woman, was eyeing her with a certain coldness. Once the boarding call sounded, Evelyn walked up to the desk, scanned her boarding pass, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The flight was fairly full, so she searched for her seat, number 18B, one row, away from her usual preference for a window seat. As she settled in, Evelyn exchanged pleasantries with the man seated in 18A, who was politely flipping through a magazine. She tucked her carry-on under the seat in front of her, leaning back with a relieved sigh. An announcement crackled overhead: "Welcome aboard Flight 2247, operated by Eagle Atlantic Airlines. We are scheduled for a 5-hour and 30-minute flight to Los Angeles." A fleeting glance from a passing flight attendant caused her a moment's pause. The man's gaze lingered a bit too long. Evelyn felt a slight discomfort, but she shrugged it off, attribution perhaps to the usual stress. Flight attendants experienced while herding passengers into their seats. She took a deep breath, and reminded herself of what was waiting on the other side of this journey, a shot at a business deal that could change her life forever. Yet, that seemingly ordinary glance was the opening note of the discord about to unravel. Within moments, Evelyn's entire perception of the world and her place in it would shift. She had no idea that the next hour of her life would echo through every conversation she had for years to come, setting off a chain of events that not only rocked her personal convictions, but also shook the very foundation of the corporate entity behind this flight. The initial sparks of conflict came unexpectedly. Just minutes after Evelyn settled into her seat, the tall, stern-faced flight attendant approached. With her rigid posture and clipped tone, the woman introduced herself as Clarissa. She asked to see Evelyn's boarding pass, her eyes scanning Evelyn's outfit as though scrutinizing her very presence. Evelyn, taken aback but obliging, handed over the pass. Clarissa frowned. "Ma'am, you're in the wrong seat," she said curtly. Evelyn's brows knit in confusion. "I'm pretty sure this is 18B, she replied calmly, pointing to the seat marker. She retrieved her ticket and read the seat assignment out loud just to confirm. It was indeed 18B. Clarissa's frown deepened. She turned to the overhead bin, rummaging through Evelyn's carry-on tags, as if searching for evidence that Evelyn didn't belong. Passengers in neighboring seats exchanged uncertain looks, some shifting uncomfortably. After a few tense moments, the flight attendant stepped back. "It appears correct," she stated tersely, offering no apology. She spun on her heels and walked away without another word. The unsettling encounter left Evelyn's stomach in knots. She glanced at the man in 18A, who flashed a quick smile of reassurance. "Don't worry about it," he whispered. "They're probably just stressed." Evelyn nodded, hoping that was all it was. After all, Evelyn had endured plenty of microaggressions in her life, from subtle remarks about her hair to insinuations about her qualifications in the tech field. She had learned to shrug it off, to keep her eyes on the prize, but something felt different this time, like an omen. About 10 minutes later, the plane's boarding process continued as a diverse range of passengers filed in. A young mother wrestled with her toddler and a large diaper bag. A group of college students chatted excitedly about a spring break trip, and a suited executive barked instructions into his phone. Meanwhile, Evelyn quietly reviewed her pitch deck on her laptop. She was too focused on the upcoming business presentation to dwell on Clarissa's odd hostility. That sense of normalcy didn't last long. Suddenly, Clarissa returned with another flight attendant, an imposing man named Dwight, whose expression echoed her disapproving glare. Dwight demanded, in a voice loud enough for several rows to hear, that Evelyn step into the aisle for a moment. Confusion spread across Evelyn's face. She complied, carefully lifting her laptop from her tray table. "Is there an issue?" she asked, maintaining her composure. Already, Evelyn felt the sting of being singled out in front of everyone. Dwight glanced at Clarissa, who tightened her jaw. Then he turned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe there's a problem with your presence on this flight." "What kind of problem?" Evelyn pressed, her heart pounding. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers burning into her back, a thick silence enveloping the cabin. Dwight's eyes narrowed, as if measuring his words. "We can't verify that you booked this ticket," he finally said. It was a stark accusation, especially coming from flight personnel who usually had digital records right at their fingertips. Evelyn produced the email confirmation on her phone, showing the purchase clearly made under her name. The entire situation was ridiculous and humiliating. Despite the proof, Dwight and Clarissa exchanged glances. The tension thickened. Meanwhile, a few people nearby began murmuring in Evelyn's defense. The man in 18A offered a supportive nod, and a woman across the aisle leaned forward to express her confusion at the attendant's behavior. Still, Evelyn couldn't ignore the twinge of dread in her gut. Something about their insistence felt personal, almost cruel. Clarissa lowered her voice, but the determination in her eyes only sharpened. Please gather your belongings, she said. We'll need you to exit the plane so we can clarify a few details. That was the moment Evelyn felt the full force of injustice sweep over her, like a chilling wind that stripped away the warmth of her excitement. For a split second she contemplated refusing outright, but the gaze from Dwight unwavering, cold told her they weren't asking. They were commanding. With her heart racing, Evelyn began collecting her belongings under the stunned stares of passengers. She forced herself to appear calm, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The memory of her mother's unwavering voice echoed in her mind. Never let them see you rattled. Evelyn clung to that. As she stood, the weight of her entire future pressed down on her shoulders. She had a critical business meeting waiting in Los Angeles. Being removed from the flight, for reasons she couldn't fathom, threatened to derail everything she'd worked so hard for. And so, Evelyn Maxwell, the brilliant, hopeful entrepreneur, left seat 18B in a swirl of confusion and dread, escorted by two flight attendants who seemed more intent on proving a point than upholding any genuine policy. As she stepped off flight 2247 and back into the gate area, she couldn't shake the sense that this confrontation went far beyond a simple ticketing error. The storm was only beginning. The moment Evelyn's feet hit the carpeted hallway of the jet bridge, she was met by a gate agent named Carl, who appeared flustered and unsure. He glanced at her ticket and then at Dwight and Clarissa. Confusion played across his face, but the flight attendant seemed resolute. Without explanation, Dwight told Carl they suspected Evelyn was on the flight fraudulently. Evelyn swallowed hard, her frustration mounting. "This is insane," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "My ticket is valid. I paid for it through the airline's official website. I've shown you the confirmation." Carl cleared his throat and glanced nervously at Evelyn's phone screen. He tapped a few keys on the computer at the gate, verifying the booking. "She's definitely listed here," he muttered, his tone uncertain. Then he turned to Clarissa. "Why are we removing her from the flight?" "We have our reasons," Clarissa replied cryptically, eyes never leaving Evelyn. There was a sinister undertone to her words, as though Evelyn's very presence threatened some unspoken order. Dwight nodded in agreement, arms folded across his chest. Before Evelyn could protest further, Dwight stepped between her and Carl, instructing Evelyn to wait to the side. "We'll figure out a solution," he said, as if the disruption of her travel plans was a trivial matter that required no further explanation. Minutes dragged by, each second amplifying Evelyn's rage and confusion. She tried to keep her composure in the bustling airport corridor, but it felt impossible. Passengers who'd been walking down the hall now paused to stare. A few recognized Evelyn from the plane and shot her sympathetic looks. Others watched with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Finally, Carl approached Evelyn, quietly apologizing for the inconvenience. "Look, I see no real reason you can't take this flight. You are legitimately booked in 18B. But even as he spoke the words, he sounded helpless, as if he had no authority to overrule the flight attendant's decision. "Then why am I still off the plane?" Evelyn demanded, exasperation leaking into her voice. "I have a critical business meeting in LA. I can't miss this flight." She glanced at the clock on her phone. It was already perilously close to departure time. Clarissa, who had been speaking with Dwight in hushed tones, approached them. "We don't feel comfortable with Miss Maxwell on board," she said simply, the statement as chilling as it was vague. "We feel there might be a potential threat." Evelyn stared at her in disbelief. "A threat?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "On what grounds? Because I'm a black woman wearing a business suit?" The instant she said it, her pulse skyrocketed. She had never been one to lean first on calling out discrimination, hoping to see the good in people. But this time, there was no rational excuse for their behavior. She saw the silent bigotry in their eyes, an old spectre rearing its ugly head. Dwight's face hardened. Carl looked increasingly anxious. clearly stuck between Evelyn's rightful claim and the flight attendant's unsubstantiated claims. "Look," Carl finally said, pulling Evelyn aside, "I could rebook you on a later flight. That might be the best I can do right now." But Evelyn's chest tightened at the idea of missing her scheduled arrival. A later flight could jeopardize everything: the pitch meeting, the carefully arranged schedule, the potential multi-million-dollar investment. She fought back tears, blinking furiously. She would not break down here, in front of these people who seemed determined to see her fail. She took a deep breath and faced Dwight, Clarissa, and Carl. "I need to speak to a supervisor," she asserted, voice steady despite her heartbreak. "Now." A tense silence followed, broken only by the murmur of travelers passing by, their footsteps echoing in the corridor. Eventually Dwight stepped forward, crossing his arms. "We've made our decision," he said. "You can fly with us another day." Inside Evelyn, something snapped. She realized this wasn't about logic or procedure. This was discrimination, pure and simple. She felt it in the humiliating way their eyes swept over her, in their refusal to accept clear evidence. She had always believed in resilience and the power of personal responsibility, but this was a test she never wanted or deserved. One thing was certain: Evelyn Maxwell would not let them crush her spirit. Standing by the gate, Evelyn's fury mixed with a heart-wrenching sense of vulnerability. For a moment, she thought about calling the police or posting a social media video right then and there. But she had seen how these incidents often played out. People ended up focusing on the victim's emotional state rather than the injustice at hand. It was then that a middle-aged black woman approached from the waiting area. She introduced herself as Denise Brown, a fellow passenger who had witnessed part of the confrontation. Soft-spoken but resolute, Denise offered Evelyn her phone number. "I saw everything," she whispered, glancing nervously at Clarissa and Dwight, who stood nearby. "If you need a statement, I can vouch for you." Evelyn felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. She collected Denise's number, promising to keep in touch. After Denise walked away, Evelyn turned back to Carl, the gate agent, who was still rifling through official procedures on his screen. Carl's expression was one of genuine discomfort. "I'm sorry," he said again, not meeting her eyes. "The attendants are insisting you can't reboard. If you want to speak to management, you'll have to file a formal complaint." "How long will that take?" Evelyn asked, her frustration mounting. "My flight leaves in minutes." Carl shook his head. "It won't be quick, and they've already locked the plane doors. It's out of my hands." The realization crashed over Evelyn. The flight was leaving without her. The pit in her stomach deepened. This was no small hiccup. This was a direct assault on her rights, her dignity, and it threatened her once-in-a-lifetime business pitch. While her mind churned with shock, Evelyn's phone buzzed in her hand. It was one of the Beverly Hills investors, texting to confirm her arrival time. She clenched her jaw and typed a quick reply, stalling as best she could. Finally, Evelyn forced herself to breathe. Her voice emerged calmer than she felt. "Carl, please book me on the next flight. I don't have time to waste." She knew she had to salvage the pitch somehow. She couldn't let these flight attendants derail her dreams. Carl nodded, relieved to have a course of action. He tapped on his keyboard, scanning for available seats. "There's a flight leaving in 4 hours, also out of JFK," he said. "I can put you on that one." Evelyn did the mental math. 4 additional hours, plus a 5.5-hour flight, plus any delays. She would arrive late, but maybe still in time for a portion of the meeting. It was better than nothing. "Do it," she said. Within minutes, she had a new boarding pass in her hand. Anger burned in her chest, but Evelyn resolved not to let it consume her. She watched as the plane she was supposed to be on began taxiing away from the gate. The injustice of it all made her want to scream, but Evelyn Maxwell wasn't someone who succumbed to despair without a fight. She took a seat in a quieter corner of the terminal, tears threatening to spill. Carefully, she drafted an email to her contact in LA, explaining her unexpected delay. She also made a mental checklist: gather witness statements, file a complaint, explore legal action. Though Evelyn longed to unleash her fury on social media, a part of her told her to wait. She wanted to ensure she did this right, with every detail documented. The next few hours were grueling. Evelyn attempted to focus on finalizing her pitch deck. Her phone buzzed intermittently with messages from her prospective investors, each ping reminding her of how precarious her circumstances had become. She refused to tell them she was forcibly removed from a flight under the guise of fraudulent suspicion. She feared it might raise doubts about her credibility, overshadowing her brilliant product. Throughout it all, a quiet but unyielding resolve formed within Evelyn. She would not let prejudice dictate her future. She would get to LA, deliver the best pitch of her life, and once she secured the success she deserved, she would come back and hold those responsible to account. Because, as Evelyn reminded herself in that lonely corner of JFK Airport, adversity only fuels the fire of those who refuse to surrender. The next flight was mercifully uneventful. Evelyn boarded without issue, though she couldn't help scanning the faces of the crew for any signs of judgment. She steeled herself, half expecting someone to call out her name and accuse her of something ridiculous. But this time, no one questioned her right to be there. She sank into her seat and exhaled deeply. The past few hours had felt like a battle. Now, at least, she had a moment's peace. Despite her exhaustion, Evelyn's mind whirled with possible scenarios. She tried to plan exactly how she would explain her delay when she landed. Should she mention discrimination? Or should she stick to a sanitized version of events, travel complications, and flight rescheduling to avoid overshadowing the meeting? The latter might be safer, but she felt a stubborn sense of injustice urging her not to hide the truth. Still, Evelyn worried about how it might be perceived, especially by investors who barely knew her. Would they see her as a victim who brings drama wherever she goes? Or, worse, would they dismiss the entire incident, brushing aside her experience as an overreaction? Eventually, she let her eyes drift shut, deciding to rest rather than overthink. As the plane soared above the clouds, Evelyn dreamed of success, of standing before a panel of executives, confidently presenting her technology and walking away with a signed contract that would catapult her startup to the next level. In her dream, she was unstoppable. The humiliating episode from earlier was but a distant memory. However, reality made itself known as soon as she landed at Los Angeles International Airport. Evelyn had arrived nearly 4 hours late, missing the initial investor presentation. She rushed through the terminal to pick up her baggage, grateful that it at least made it onto this flight. The LA sky was a brilliant shade of blue as she dashed to find a rideshare. Once inside the car, she called her primary contact, a senior partner named James Porter, known for his involvement with top-tier VC firms. James's voice on the phone was polite but firm. "Evelyn, we had to proceed without you. However, we can still meet if you can make it to the office by 7 p.m. Evelyn glanced at the time on her phone. It was already 5:30 p.m. and traffic in LA could be brutal. She swallowed her frustration and nodded to herself. "I'll be there," she promised, sounding more confident than she felt. The driver was a friendly man who asked Evelyn if she was in town for business or pleasure. Her mind was too consumed to chat, so she offered a polite smile and a short response. The car wove through congested highways, honking and screeching, each minute on the clock feeling like a lost opportunity. Evelyn silently prayed for a miracle that traffic would ease just enough for her to arrive on time. At 6:50 p.m., The rideshare finally pulled up to the sleek glass building in Beverly Hills that housed the investment firm's satellite office. Evelyn tipped the driver generously and sprinted inside, wearing her carry-on bag like a shield. Her heels clicked against polished marble floors as she hurried to the receptionist's desk, breathless. "Evelyn Maxwell for Mr. Porter," she managed, trying to catch her breath. The receptionist, a calm woman with a headset, guided her to a private lounge. Within moments, James Porter stepped in. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed beard, he was the epitome of corporate composure. He extended his hand in greeting. "You made it," he said, smiling politely. Evelyn could see the reserved curiosity in his eyes. She offered her own professional smile. "Thank you for accommodating me, Mr. Porter." She quickly set up her laptop on a small coffee table. The presentation was about to begin, and Evelyn could only hope that the chaos of the day wouldn't dull her polished approach. Her throat felt tight, her nerves were frayed, but she channeled every ounce of her determination. She was here after all. This had to count. Evelyn's pitch began on shaky ground. She felt the weight of the day's humiliations pressing on her, threatening to derail her concentration. Still, she pressed forward. Her slides showcased the innovative nature of Solar Nexus, a proprietary software designed to optimize data flow in large-scale solar installations. It pinpointed inefficiencies, reduced energy loss, and provided operators real-time analytics to maximize output. Evelyn's knowledge ran deep. She had studied renewable energy systems since her sophomore year in college and spent countless hours coding the software. As she spoke, her voice gained momentum. The adrenaline that had fueled her fury earlier now morphed into a powerful driving force. She gestured passionately, explaining how her platform could transform the solar industry, making renewables even more competitive against fossil fuels. Mr. Porter and two associates, a man and a woman, listened intently, taking notes and occasionally exchanging glances. When Evelyn finished, the room settled into a brief silence. Mr. Porter leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Impressive work," he said thoughtfully. "I especially like the predictive analytics module. How much seed funding are you looking for?" Evelyn mentioned her figure, several $1 million to scale operations, hire additional developers, and expand marketing efforts. A hush fell once more. The male associate, who introduced himself as Aaron, raised a question about Evelyn's financial projections. Evelyn navigated the query with confidence, referencing well-researched market data. Then came the question she had been dreading. "Why were you late today?" asked the female associate. Sasha, arching an eyebrow. The tone wasn't accusing, but Evelyn sensed the underlying concern: professionalism, reliability, how you handle unexpected hurdles. Evelyn swallowed, considering how to answer. She could skirt the truth, offer a benign explanation about airline delays. But as she stared at their expectant faces, something in her stirred. She poured her heart and soul into Solar Nexus, aiming to stand on the right side of innovation and justice. Should she hide the reality of discrimination? "I had a complication with my original flight," she said at first. But then, in a rush, she allowed the truth to spill out. In concise terms, she recounted the humiliating incident: being kicked off a flight despite having a valid ticket, feeling targeted, and eventually having to scramble to find another flight. Her voice wavered slightly, but she lifted her chin, refusing to let shame color her narrative. Sasha's expression shifted from curiosity to empathy. Aaron tapped his pen against his notebook, a small frown crossing his features. Mr. Porter let out a low sigh. "That's terrible," he said softly, a note of genuine concern in his voice. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Evelyn nodded, forcing a grateful smile. "I wasn't sure if I should mention it," she admitted, "but I believe in transparency, And it is the reason I arrived late. Mr. Porter exchanged a glance with Sasha and Aaron. Then he turned to Evelyn with a measured grin. We appreciate your honesty, he said. Now let's talk business. Evelyn's heart soared. Even as she felt the anger and hurt from earlier simmer beneath the surface, a small flame of hope flickered. Maybe justice would come in more ways than one, through success in her career, through telling her story, and through holding those who wronged her accountable. The meeting concluded with the promise of a follow-up discussion. Mr. Porter would consult with his fellow partners. They wanted more details on Evelyn's financial strategy, but it was clear that they saw promise in her. As Evelyn packed up her laptop, a sense of triumph mingled with exhaustion. She had clawed her way here against the odds, refusing to let discrimination define her story. If nothing else, Evelyn knew she had fought valiantly for this moment. Later that evening, Evelyn found herself in the quiet sanctuary of a friend's guest room, her old college roommate, Tiffany, who now lived in West Hollywood. Tiffany had graciously offered her a place to stay while Evelyn handled her business in LA. She dimmed the lights, pulled out her laptop, and began drafting a detailed complaint to Eagle Atlantic Airlines. Every detail mattered. The names of the attendants, Clarissa and Dwight, the gate agent Carl, the seat number, and the humiliating statements. Her fingers raced over the keyboard as she recounted the sinking feeling of being singled out and removed from the plane. She attached a copy of her boarding pass, her email confirmation, and a brief statement she had recorded right after the incident, her own immediate testimony of what had transpired. Evelyn debated whether to mention the words racial discrimination outright, but it felt necessary. She had to name the truth. When she finished, Evelyn's eyes blurred from exhaustion. She took a moment to review the text. Her phone lay next to her, screen illuminating new messages, one from Denise Brown, the Good Samaritan passenger who had witnessed the incident. Evelyn had politely emailed Denise a request for a statement. To her relief, Denise replied with a heartfelt note confirming Evelyn's account. Evelyn felt a surge of gratitude for the kindness of strangers, a reminder that not everyone succumbed to prejudice. She clicked send. It was done. The formal complaint was out in the open, a digital testament to the injustice she had endured. She had no idea if or how Eagle Atlantic Airlines would respond, but she knew she wouldn't let it rest quietly. Shutting the laptop, Evelyn allowed herself a moment to think about the future. Her entire life was a tapestry of resilience growing up in Queens, earning a scholarship to a top college, juggling multiple jobs to fund her early tech projects. Every hurdle had eventually become a stepping stone. She had to believe this incident, too, would be transformed into something bigger than herself. In the hushed stillness of Tiffany's guest room, Evelyn made a promise. Once her business was stable, she would do everything she could to challenge the culture that enabled such blatant discrimination. Maybe that meant going public with her story, or possibly initiating a campaign to demand better accountability from airlines. A part of her even imagined the improbable scenario of buying enough airline stocks to have a say in board-level decisions. It sounded far-fetched, but Evelyn had learned never to underestimate the force of sheer determination and vision. At around midnight, her phone vibrated with a new email. She sat up, heart pounding, suspecting it might be from the airline, but instead it was from James Porter. He wanted more information about her software's scalability and user interface. The tone was professional, but Evelyn read between the lines. He was seriously considering a partnership. She composed a thoughtful response, weaving in her technology's ability to adapt to different solar farm sizes, updating him on next steps she could take to pilot the system in a real-world environment. By the time Evelyn fell asleep, her anger had cooled, replaced by a fierce resolve. She saw a path forming, one she never anticipated. Step by step, she would pursue justice and success with equal fervor. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to ensure no one else had to endure what she had that day at JFK. Weeks passed in a whirlwind of negotiations and deadlines. True to his word, Mr. Porter arranged a second, more formal meeting with his colleagues, this time with Evelyn's full presentation in a boardroom, complete with her demonstration of Solar Nexus's analytics dashboards. The conversation was electric. The partners peppered her with tough questions, but Evelyn answered each query with clarity and insight, drawing from her extensive research. By the end of the meeting, Evelyn felt their enthusiasm crackling in the air. That evening, Mr. Porter pulled her aside. "We're in," he said, extending a handshake. "We'll finalize the paperwork, but you can count on our support." Evelyn nearly collapsed from the flood of relief and excitement. The deal was substantial, enough to bring on additional engineers, expand marketing, and pilot Solar Nexus at a significant solar farm. It was a moment she had dreamt about for years. Her eyes shone with gratitude and triumph. While her professional life soared, Evelyn stayed diligent in her fight against Eagle Atlantic Airlines. She had received an initial generic response from the airline's customer service department, apologizing for any inconvenience and insisting they would investigate the matter. It was a textbook corporate reply, devoid of genuine accountability or empathy. Evelyn pressed further, supplying evidence and requesting direct communication with a higher-level representative. Soon, legal resources came knocking as well. Evelyn's story, which she shared with a few close colleagues, sparked outrage. A friend of a friend put her in touch with a civil rights attorney named Olivia Chan. Olivia was known for tackling systemic discrimination cases with formidable zeal. After reviewing Evelyn's documentation, Olivia offered her services, convinced they could launch a lawsuit if the airline didn't rectify the situation. Meanwhile, Evelyn was also making strides in the tech community. With the new funding, she hired a small team of developers who shared her vision. They set up an office in Los Angeles, bright and modern, complete with glass walls and wide windows that let in the California sunshine. Evelyn traveled back and forth between New York and LA, juggling her responsibilities while never forgetting the injustice she had endured. A turning point came when Evelyn was invited to speak on a local tech podcast about Solar Nexus. The host, an energetic journalist named Mia, asked about Evelyn's background, her journey as a black female founder in tech, and the challenges she faced. Evelyn hesitated briefly should she mention the airline incident. Then she remembered her vow to confront prejudice openly. "I recently experienced blatant discrimination by Eagle Atlantic Airlines," Evelyn said, her voice firm but controlled. She shared the broad strokes of being removed from a flight for no valid reason, highlighting how these everyday acts of bias could derail even the most driven entrepreneurs. Mia responded with empathy, promising to bring more attention to Evelyn's story. The podcast episode went live, gaining traction on social media. Some listeners expressed outrage, while others recounted their own experiences of prejudice. Comments poured in, ranging from supportive to skeptical, yet Evelyn refused to be silenced. If speaking her truth helped even one person, it was worth it. Days later, Evelyn received a phone call from a senior executive at Eagle Atlantic Airlines, a man named Marcus Whitfield. He offered an apology over the phone, emphasizing that the airline was taking this incident very seriously. He also asked if Evelyn would meet with him to discuss an amicable resolution. Evelyn's heart pounded at the offer. Was this genuine accountability or another placating gesture? She accepted the meeting, determined to see it through. She refused to let them brush her under the rug with empty words. Little did she know that destiny had even bigger plans. forging a path that would upend not only the flight attendants who had wronged her, but the entire corporate structure they served. Evelyn arrived at the Eagle Atlantic Airlines corporate office in downtown Manhattan, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. The office tower was a monument of glass and steel, symbolizing wealth and power. A polished receptionist guided her to a sleek conference room on the 29th floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bustling city below. Evelyn clutched a small binder containing her evidence of discrimination, her heart pounding with defiant energy. Inside, two individuals waited: the senior executive, Marcus Whitfield, a charismatic man in his mid-50s, and a company attorney named Patricia Lowe. Marcus stood to greet Evelyn, extending a handshake. "Miss Maxwell, thank you for meeting with us," he said, his tone conciliatory but guarded. Patricia merely nodded, flipping through a thick folder. The conversation started politely. Marcus apologized on behalf of the airline, insisting their core values did not align with the behavior Evelyn had experienced. But as Evelyn pressed for specifics, would the flight attendants be held accountable? Was there an internal policy for discrimination cases? How would the airline ensure this never happened again? Marcus deflected with vague assurances. Patricia chimed in, referencing scheduling changes for certain crew members, but carefully sidestepped the question of official disciplinary actions. Frustration simmered in Evelyn's chest. She wanted more than an apology or hush money. She wanted real change, an acknowledgement that the airline had a structural problem that allowed employees like Clarissa and Dwight to wield their biases unchecked. Sensing her resolve, Patricia slid a piece of paper across the table. It detailed a settlement offer, including a non-disclosure agreement. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken as she scanned the terms: a modest sum of money, a vow of silence, and a promise not to pursue further legal action. Evelyn laid the paper down gently, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not looking for a quick payout," she said, voice unwavering. "I want meaningful change. Have you considered mandatory bias training, an explicit no-tolerance policy, or direct accountability measures for your employees?" Marcus pursed his lips. "We can discuss that, but we do believe this settlement is fair compensation for your inconvenience and distress." "Inconvenience?" Evelyn repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. She thought of the humiliation, the lost flight, the scramble to salvage her business pitch, and the weeks of emotional turmoil. "You understand, this isn't just about me, right? It's about every passenger who's ever been profiled or mistreated by someone who thinks they can wield power without consequence." Marcus exchanged a quick look with Patricia. Evelyn recognized the corporate tactic: downplay the incident, pay it off, keep it quiet. A wave of clarity washed over her. Settling in silence might bring short-term financial relief, but it wouldn't reshape a broken system. At that moment, Evelyn realized she was done playing small. She stood, gathering her binder. "I appreciate the gesture, but I won't sign this," she said, tapping the settlement paper. "I'll be pursuing my legal options. And if you want to really make amends, start by making meaningful changes within your airline." Marcus's face flickered with surprise. Patricia looked displeased. Evelyn offered no apology as she turned on her heels and left the conference room. She rode the elevator down with an odd sense of calm. They wanted her silent, but Evelyn Maxwell's voice would only grow louder. Standing in the lobby, gazing at the towering corporate edifice, Evelyn felt a surge of determination. This was far from over. Weeks bled into months, and Evelyn's life underwent a remarkable transformation. With Mr. Porter's backing secured, Solar Nexus launched a pilot program at a large solar installation in the Mojave Desert. Early results were promising: significant reductions in energy loss, streamlined maintenance coordination, and glowing reviews from on-site engineers. Tech journals began to take note, featuring Evelyn's software as a breakthrough in clean energy technology. Meanwhile, Evelyn and her attorney, Olivia Chan, pressed forward with legal strategies against Eagle Atlantic Airlines. They filed a formal complaint with the Federal Department of Transportation, citing discriminatory practices and negligence. Olivia's stance was fierce. She demanded the airline produce internal documents, training protocols, and records of any complaints lodged against those specific flight attendants. Evelyn braced herself for a lengthy legal battle, well aware that big corporations often relied on an endless supply of resources to wear down plaintiffs. But Evelyn's fortunes surged when one of her new investors turned out to have significant influence in media circles. Subtle inquiries sparked broader interest in Evelyn's story. Journalists began connecting Evelyn's fight with the airline to a bigger pattern of racial bias in air travel, shining a spotlight on discriminatory practices. Public pressure mounted, prompting more witnesses to come forward. A former Eagle Atlantic employee leaked that the airline had a history of ignoring or downplaying passenger complaints. Suddenly, Evelyn was not alone in her fight. A wave of public opinion formed behind her. During this time, Evelyn also found an unexpected ally in a private equity group that specialized in acquisitions. During a networking event, Evelyn was introduced to Fiona Brandt, a partner at a major investment firm known for taking over underperforming companies. Fiona happened to be deeply interested in Evelyn's software and in Evelyn herself, describing her as a visionary with unstoppable tenacity. When Fiona learned about the airline dispute, she smirked knowingly. "Their leadership is archaic," she remarked. "I've been eyeing them for a possible takeover if their stock continues to dip." For Evelyn, the idea of a private equity takeover of Eagle Atlantic sounded surreal, yet a tiny spark ignited in her mind. What if there was a way to transform the airline from the inside out? Would that even be feasible? The notion felt outlandish, but Evelyn had achieved things others deemed impossible before. As the scandal gained traction, Eagle Atlantic's stock wavered. Public sentiment matters, especially in an industry where brand reputation can be the difference between success and failure. Social media campaigns called for boycotts, demanding that the airline address systemic discrimination. Executives scrambled to reassure stakeholders, but a growing segment of the public wanted accountability, not PR spin. Late one evening, Evelyn was in the office, finalizing a big partnership deal for Solar Nexus. Amid the glow of computer screens, she received an unexpected phone call. On the other end was Fiona Brandt. "Evelyn," Fiona began, her voice pulsing with excitement, "I have a proposition for you." Evelyn set aside her laptop, her heart throbbing in her chest. She listened as Fiona laid out an audacious plan. The private equity firm was indeed preparing to make a strategic play for Eagle Atlantic Airlines. If successful, Fiona's group would gain significant control, and Evelyn, if she wished, could come aboard as a consultant, potentially even part of the new ownership structure. A swirl of emotions overtook Evelyn: shock, intrigue, and a sense of poetic justice that both thrilled and terrified her. She needed time to think, but one thing was certain: the tables were turning in ways no one could have predicted. The airline that had once kicked her off a flight was now on the brink of a major upheaval, one that could place Evelyn Maxwell in a position of unprecedented power. At first, Evelyn couldn't wrap her mind around it. Buying an airline, or even part of one, felt like a leap from her realm of tech entrepreneurship. Yet, the more she spoke with Fiona and studied the numbers, the more she saw the potential. Eagle Atlantic had decent flight routes, especially international ones, but was plagued by high overhead and inefficient management, a perfect target for a private equity revamp. Fiona's firm, Redwood Capital, had a record of transforming companies on the brink, installing new leadership, cutting waste, and overhauling outdated policies. In Evelyn's eyes, it also meant a chance to effect real change in an industry that had so brazenly wronged her. Fiona outlined a scenario where Evelyn could become a minority owner, leveraging her personal stake not just for financial gain, but as a platform to mandate comprehensive reforms, from mandatory bias training to restructured complaint procedures. Of course, the plan wasn't guaranteed. Redwood Capital needed to quietly purchase enough shares to gain leverage without spiking the stock price prematurely. They needed Evelyn to maintain her lawsuit quietly for now, to keep the pressure mounting. Once Redwood Capital had the controlling interest, Evelyn would drop the lawsuit in exchange for an out-of-court settlement and join the new ownership structure. It was a dance of high finance, legal intricacies, and moral conviction. With Solar Nexus thriving, Evelyn already found her schedule overflowing. She worried whether she had the capacity to dive into an entirely different business sector, but every time she recalled the humiliation on that plane, the stares, the unsubtle hostility of Clarissa and Dwight, she felt the same rush of determination that had propelled her through life's obstacles. If she could become part of Eagle Atlantic's leadership, she could help ensure that no one else was ever told they didn't belong. As weeks passed, Redwood Capital progressed with its stealth acquisitions. Meanwhile, Evelyn's civil case slowly moved forward, with the airline's legal team showing signs of agitation as more negative press swirled. Media outlets discovered Evelyn's success story in tech, a young black woman forging a path in a competitive industry, and juxtaposed it with the incident of blatant discrimination. Public sympathy leaned heavily in Evelyn's favor. The airline's attempts to paint the matter as a misunderstanding fell flat, especially as more employees came forward with accounts of managerial pressure to maintain a certain image on flights. Behind closed doors, Redwood Capital inched closer to its target. Finally, on a crisp autumn morning, Fiona called Evelyn with triumphant news. Redwood Capital had secured enough stock to gain substantial influence. The official takeover would be announced within days after a final legal review. Evelyn's hands shook as she hung up the phone. She gazed at the city skyline through her LA office window, heart brimming with a mixture of awe and righteous excitement. Soon she would walk into Eagle Atlantic's corporate headquarters, not as a disgruntled passenger, but as someone with a say in how the airline was run. The seat of power would shift beneath those who had dismissed her, forcing them to reckon with the consequences of their actions. This wasn't just personal vengeance, though. Evelyn couldn't deny that the poetic justice felt satisfying. It was a chance to right a systemic wrong, to empower others who might have been cast aside by bias and discrimination. Evelyn resolved that once she was in a position to act, she would champion reforms that would echo across the aviation industry. The question now was whether the old guard at Eagle Atlantic would bow to the winds of change or fight back with everything they had. The day of the takeover was surreal. News broke across major financial outlets. Redwood Capital completed a strategic acquisition of Eagle Atlantic Airlines. The airline's CEO, a stoic figure named Gregory Holt, was swiftly replaced. Fiona Brandt stepped into an interim leadership role, bringing a cadre of Redwood Capital experts to reorganize the corporate structure. Headlines read, "Private equity firm shakes up major airline, promises new era in air travel." In a suite on the 30th floor of the airline's corporate headquarters, Evelyn attended her first board meeting as a minority owner and consultant. She wore a commanding black blazer, her expression composed, but her eyes burned with purpose. Fiona introduced her formally, nodding in respect. Other board members, most of them older and skeptical, exchanged puzzled looks. A hush settled over the room when Evelyn took the floor. She locked eyes with each person, unafraid. "My name is Evelyn Maxwell. You might have heard of me or read the incident report of how I was removed from one of your flights months ago. Today, I'm here to help ensure that never happens again, not to me, not to anyone." Behind her, slides flickered on a screen, outlining a bold plan for corporate reform. Mandatory diversity and bias training for all employees, from flight attendants to senior executives. Updated complaint procedures with real accountability metrics. A zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, an internal audit department dedicated to investigating passenger complaints. Evelyn's voice rang with conviction. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, others nodded in cautious agreement. After the presentation, Fiona added Redwood Capital's official stance. They backed Evelyn's reforms as part of modernizing the airline's entire approach to customer service. With Redwood Capital holding the reins, the changes were less of a question and more of an impending reality. Evelyn could see the subtle undercurrent of resistance from those who profited under the old regime, but she knew Redwood Capital held the majority. The board would have little choice but to comply. Later, Evelyn strolled the corridors of the corporate tower, recalling the day she had come here seeking an apology and left with a feeble settlement offer. She passed by the same conference room door where Marcus Whitfield and Patricia Lowe had tried to silence her with hush money. The memory felt like a lifetime ago. Now, Evelyn moved with the authority of an owner, people stepping aside as she walked with Fiona, discussing next steps. Once they reached Fiona's new office, Evelyn paused at the threshold, reflecting on the path that led her here from that humiliating moment on flight 2247 to this vantage of true influence. She thought of the potential for real impact, an airline that acknowledged and actively fought discrimination rather than turning a blind eye. As Evelyn left the building, passing reporters who clamored for interviews, she felt an almost cinematic sense of closure. But it wasn't just closure, this was a launch point for something greater. She would stay vigilant, hold the new management team accountable, and press forward with reforms until they were fully embedded in the airline's DNA. The next day, Evelyn walked into a hangar at JFK, where employees of Eagle Atlantic had gathered for a special town hall meeting. Senior officials from Redwood Capital and Evelyn herself would address the staff directly. Evelyn stood on a small stage, scanning rows of flight attendants, pilots, and ground crew workers in uniform. A flicker of recognition crossed her face as she spotted two individuals in the back, Clarissa and Dwight, the very flight attendants who had kicked her off the plane. They stood with stiff shoulders, uncertainty etched into their features. Evelyn held their gaze for a moment, neither anger nor triumph in her eyes, only the steady resolve of a leader who'd come full circle. She cleared her throat. "Good morning," Evelyn began, voice echoing across the hangar. "I'm here because change is not just an idea, it's an action. And this airline is about to take action to ensure everyone, from employee to passenger, feels respected and valued. Let's begin." And so, Evelyn Maxwell triumphed not simply by securing a seat on a flight that once refused her, but by reshaping the entire airline from the inside. Through tenacity, courage, and an unwavering sense of justice, she turned humiliation into empowerment, paving the way for everyone who has ever been told they didn't belong. Evelyn's journey reminds us that the greatest breakthroughs often arise from our darkest moments. If you found this story gripping, inspiring, or even enraging, don't let Evelyn's message stop here. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel so more people can discover the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for what's right. Join our growing community and let's spread stories that spark real change together. After all, each of us holds the power to rewrite the narrative and claim our rightful place in any arena.